Okay, so now we get to our gospel passage for the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time. I forgot to mention that in the last video. 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time, our gospel passage. It comes right on the heels of last week's gospel passage, and it's verses 44 through 52. There's an option, as there has been the last couple of weeks, that if the preacher is preaching about something else or something, he can read verses 44 through 46 and not read the last little part here of Jesus' teaching. Now, what's fascinating here is actually the lectionary is helping me out. I know sometimes I might give the lectionary a hard time for skipping verses, and it's ultimately not the lectionary that I'm giving a hard time to. But anyway, it helped me out this week, actually, because it begins by saying Jesus said to his disciples, which is not how verse 44 begins. It just continues a quote from Jesus, giving more parables. So if we look back, this is just a little bit of background here. If we look back, the last time we heard Jesus speaking at the end of last week's gospel passage was verse 36 through 43, of course. So he preached the parables, and then he left the crowd and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and asked him for the explanation of the weeds and the wheat parable. So then Jesus continues talking after he gives the explanation. So these parables, the rest of the parables that we've been hearing the last couple of weeks, they've been preached to the general crowds, to everyone who's there to listen. Now, these particular parables are addressed to the disciples. This is a fascinating thing. And I don't necessarily know what particularly special meaning it has beyond it being another parable, but I think it's just worthwhile considering this, that the people listening to Jesus in this week's gospel are his disciples, people who have committed themselves to him. And maybe the key is coming in the very last verse that we're going to read. Anyway, so let's get into the passage. Chapter 13, verses 44 through 52. So Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field, which a person finds and hides again, and out of joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea, which collects fish of every kind. When it is full, they haul it ashore and sit down to put what is good into buckets. What is bad, they throw away. Thus it will be at the end of the age. The angels will go out and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Do you understand all these things?" They answered, "Yes." And he replied, "Then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household, who brings from his storeroom both the new and the old." There we go. Okay, this is good. Maybe, yeah, I have a number of ideas that went through my mind as I was reading this. The parables, they just follow one after the other, boom, 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 boom. And maybe Jesus knows he can just keep going because he's speaking to his disciples. I don't really know. Anyway, let's just break it down. Okay, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field. Okay, so you gotta imagine this for a minute. Imagine one day you're walking in a field and you find this treasure. How do you find the treasure? Well, I don't really know. You must have been digging in this field or something, or maybe you saw like something gold caught your eye. Who knows? Whatever. You find a treasure buried in a field. Now, if we're reading this from a 21st century perspective, 21st century in the United States perspective, and you find a treasure in a field, what are you going to do? You're going to keep it. That's what you're going to do. You're going to look around, and maybe if your conscience is pricking you, you're going to go around asking like, hey, whose field is this? But probably the thing that you're not going to do, well, maybe you would. I don't know. I would say the general thing that you're not going to do is bury it again so that you lose track of it. But instead, what you're going to do is you're going to like carry this thing around, or maybe you'll conceal it and bring it to another town or something to cash it in. Who knows? But nonetheless, try to put on your first century Jewish hat, and you find this treasure, and you're just like looking around. You're just like, oh man, good, nobody's seen it. You bury it, and you slowly do what? You hide it, and out of joy, you go sell all that you have, and you buy that field. What's the message here? The message is that you can't steal the kingdom, but that you have to give everything that you have. Right? But the fact of giving everything that you have, you know that what you're buying is worth more than what you have. Far more. Out of joy, you go and sell everything that you have so that you can buy this field. This is, do we know this about the kingdom of heaven, that it actually has a cost to it? And we know this. We talk about this every week, about how to be a disciple of Jesus is not to be a member of the crowd, but it's to step out of the crowd. That in itself is a little bit of a cost. But then to have more information, because Jesus teaches you more, because he shares more of his himself with you. We've heard this. Jesus says, to the one who has, more will be given. But then he also says in other places, whoever has been given much, much will be expected from that one. So there's a real cost actually to being a disciple. But the real cost, which is to give everything, it's going to yield a return that is worth far more than what you're selling to get it. That's the message of this first paragraph. And the second one is very similar. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. When he finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. Now this one's actually a little strange if you let yourself think about it for a minute. So again, you're a merchant, and so you have a particular eye for pearls, a particular eye for costly things that other people don't have, because not everyone is a merchant. And so you're walking through the store, the marketplace one day, and you see this pearl, and you're just like looking around, you're like, I can't believe no one else is eyeing up this pearl, because this is incredible. And so what do? You go and sell all that you have so you can buy this pearl. Now what's strange about this is, like, okay, great, what are you going to do with the pearl? Like, what are you going to do? I've never really thought about this before. What are you going to do with, like, you have nothing left. You have no money for food. You have no money for clothing. You have no money for shelter. You have nothing left, but at least you have your pearl. Right? Like, what are you going to do with it? I don't know. It's not going to feed you. It's not going to clothe you. It's not going to give you hydration. But what you know is you have your pearl. And maybe this is the message here is that for the general people, those of us who strive to enter through the narrow gate, who are willing to lose everything except to lose this pearl, the kingdom of heaven, we look foolish and we look silly, because most people are like, great, that's great, you're being faithful to God. What's that actually going to get you? Maybe because they don't actually believe in God, or they don't believe that there's a cost to this. Maybe, who knows? But what we do know is that for this person, for this merchant, to have the pearl simply by itself was enough. And so for us, when we're talking about the kingdom of heaven, it is enough, even if it costs us everything. We can think of the example of the martyrs. It literally, to follow Jesus, to be his disciple, cost them their entire lives, everything they had, including their very breath. And yet, that was enough. They clung to the pearl, the kingdom of heaven, willing to let go of everything else for the sake of the kingdom. And what's their reward? Eternal bliss, eternal joys with God. That's enough. That's more than enough, in fact. You're getting in return for what you sell. You're getting far more than anything you could really understand. That's the gift. That's the thing. Okay, what else? Then it gets into a little bit of a trickier thing, right? The kingdom of heaven is like a net, and this is actually, it reminds us maybe of the wheat and the weeds last week. The kingdom of, like a net thrown into the sea. It collects fish of every kind. When it's full, they haul it ashore and sit down and put what is good into buckets. What is bad, they throw away. I actually think of this when I was a kid. My family would go out to this lake place that my grandparents had, and we would get a net, and sometimes we would just walk through and try to collect minnows so that we could go fishing. And I remember my dad and his brothers would do this, and us kids, our cousins, we would walk behind and just sort of watch it was going, and then they would pull up the net, and there would be all kinds of fish. In fact, it was kind of strange because when you're watching this happen, you didn't always see the fish like swimming toward the net. I was always amazed every time there was like a bunch of fish in this net. Anyway, my dad and his uncles, they wouldn't even have to think twice, because they knew what they were looking for. They knew the minnows that they were looking for, and so they would just go through. Oh no, not that one, not that one. Like there'd be baby fish, there would be perch and like baby bass sometimes, and so just like throw them back. It's not what we're looking for. This is what we were looking for. So this is the thing. Okay, what is good goes into buckets. The very thing and they're fishermen, right? So they know what they're looking for, and what is bad they throw away. We don't want that one. It's not what we're looking for. It's not going to be good for our business. It's not going to be good for our fishing, in my case, right? This kind of thing. So just get rid of it. Thus it will be at the end of the age. The angels will go out and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. It's not even so much a matter of like they're being thrown back. It's that they're being thrown into a place where they'll be destroyed. Now, again, this seems really strange. And in fact, if you're one of my people watching this, you know that I preached about this last weekend, that Jesus, he speaks about judgment and he speaks about hell a lot, surprisingly, a lot. And the way that he speaks about judgment and the way that he speaks about hell, it is striking. It's not just like you will be rejected, but instead it's you will be sent into the fiery furnace where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Hell is not just this place that you like. It's not just like not heaven. It is torment and misery. That's what it is, which is kind of scary. And this actually, if you think about it, if you're a Catholic watching this, you know that our our act of contrition in the sacrament of reconciliation, I confess these sins, or I'm sorry for these sins, because I dread the loss of heaven and the pains of hell. Part of it, yes, because, hopefully it's like, but most of all because they offend you, my God. But there is this thing we call imperfect contrition, which is I avoid sin because I dread hell. I dread the loss of heaven and the pains of hell. This is a real thing that Jesus himself talks about. Now, really important, really important. Now, of course, we want to end up in the bucket of the Lord. Just like last week we wanted to end up in the barn of the Lord, so now this week we want to end up in the bucket, because what is good goes into the bucket. What is the bucket? Of course, it's the kingdom of heaven, obviously, right? Okay, now Jesus gets to this. Now, this is where I think he's very clearly talking to his disciples. What does he say? Do you understand all these things? So again, it's parables, and so there's a reality here where it's a comparison, but there's also a reality where it's kind of a riddle. And so Jesus is like, do you understand this? As though it's like, okay, I've spoken these riddles to you. Do you get them? Sometimes when you're telling a story and you want to use veiled language for the purpose of maybe you actually don't want everyone to know, because you're trying to keep a secret, and these are the mysteries of the kingdom, the secrets of the kingdom. And it's not that Jesus doesn't want people to know. It's more that he wants his disciples to really listen. Whoever has ears ought to hear. It's that he wants his disciples to really tune in and pay attention to him. Do you understand all these things? They answered yes. Now, I've wondered, just, I guess not always, I shouldn't say always, but just in the last few days, what if they had said no? I don't know what that would be like. Maybe Jesus would have had to give further teaching, or he would have just been like, okay, well, too bad, I don't know, but they said yes. Fortunately, they said yes. So then he says, so then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household, who brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. So every scribe, what is a scribe? So we hear about this in the Gospels, the scribes and the Pharisees, or the scribes and the Sadducees, whatever, the scribes. These are people who studied the scriptures. They copied the scriptures, in fact. They made copies of them by writing, writing them out. And so they would have been very familiar with the scripture. So he's saying, then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven. So these people have a knack for memory. They have a knack for remembering the details of the scriptures. And in this case, Jesus is saying, okay, every scribe who's been instructed in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like all of these things that we've been reading about in Matthew 13. Every scribe who's been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household, who brings from his storeroom both the new and the old. The new, of course, these are the mysteries of the kingdom that Jesus himself is talking about, the secrets of the kingdom, this beautiful, this privileged information that they're getting from the Lord Jesus by listening to him, by tuning into him, by asking him questions. But then also, and the old. That is to say, in the light of the Old Testament, this is how you are to interpret the mysteries of the kingdom. That we're not, as Christians, we're not only a New Testament people. Of course, the New Testament is incredibly valuable. It's where we find the Gospels. It's where we find the letters of St. Paul and other letters. It's incredibly valuable. But we also don't just throw out the Old Testament. Some Christians want to just throw out the Old Testament. And they don't see, actually, as St. Augustine says, that the Old Testament prefigures the new. In other words, it points forward to the New Testament, and it shows us what the New Testament is going to look like, although it's not exactly the same, but nonetheless it points forward to the New Testament. And the New Testament actually is hidden in the Old, that it points back to the Old Testament. And we can read, after you're reading the New Testament, you can be reading the Old Testament and be like, oh man, this, like, and for example, Jesus tends to sound a lot like the prophets. He's not so radically different that he's completely different from the prophets. No, he tends to sound a lot like the prophets. There's a structure in the Christian community that Jesus established. Just like with Moses and with King David, like there was a structure in the kingdom of Israel, so too there's a structure in the kingdom of heaven. We see all kinds of different things playing back and forth between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so Jesus is saying, look, if you're a scribe who's been instructed in the kingdom, don't just throw out the old, but instead hang on to the old and let it be enlightened even more by the mysteries of the new. And let the new shed more and more and more light onto the old, so that together you can see that yes, the Lord is doing something new in the person of his son Jesus. He is doing something new in establishing this Christian community, but it's not so new that it's completely disconnected to the old. Instead, it flows out of the Old Testament. Beautiful. Really, I love this passage. And this will conclude our exposition into Matthew 13. In fact, next week, when we get to the gospel, or when we get to our readings, we're actually not even going to be in ordinary time, because we're celebrating a great feast day, the Transfiguration. But we'll wait until we get there. In fact, we just got to sit here. We got to sit here, and we'll look at the next video when we look at Romans chapter 8, continuing to work our way through that. Okay, God bless you.